Outrider podcast, Bad Business, is a 6-part series about crime and detective fiction. I'm joined by a pair of shady figures, my friends Todd Robbins and Paul Fecto. So come with us as we descend into the seedy underbelly of fiction, where charming crooks, hard-boiled detectives, and femme fatales are all up to some very bad business. Welcome to the Outrider podcast. I'm here with the ever-faithful Todd and Paul, and this is our 5th episode, and we're discussing Thomas Pynchon's Inherent Vice and Richard Brautigan's Dreaming of Babylon.
So, Thomas Pynchon. Pynchon went to the Navy, then he went and got an English degree at Cornell, then he became a tech writer, and you know where that leads somebody.
Yeah, for Boeing, apparently, in Seattle.
And that's the last we know of his biography to some extent. We could say more about that in a minute.
You're missing out that his teeth, he has weird teeth.
Yeah, there's something about his teeth. I've heard that too, but I don't know. Do you know the full story in that?
Somebody said he was self-conscious about it when he was a teenager, but who isn't self-conscious about their teeth anyway when they're 16? So
we have like a picture of him from the Navy and a picture from Boeing, I think, and in both of those he looks kind of like a buck teeth kind of fellow.
I read that he had some surgery to repair it, and it was painful, and that was about his. And so he's just still self-conscious, so he stays private, which everybody likes to call him a recluse. I was Wikipedia reading, which is probably why I forgot that bag.
But you're right, the recluse term is really not quite accurate, right?
Yeah, he's just private.
Yeah, he doesn't. He long before there was social media, he was not in the media, period. From what I understand, he's been living in New York and had a family, and writers come through town and he visits with them and has lunch and stuff, and he just doesn't do interviews and doesn't do promotion and that kind of stuff, and that's what gives him to the point that it was satirized even on The Simpsons.
Yep.
There's a Simpsons episode where Pynchon character appears wearing a bag.
And that's actually voiced by Pynchon, I've heard.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so.
It's still fairly unusual to be able to fly that successfully under the radar.
True.
Obviously, it sort of fits with the nature of some of his writing, and it's sort of become part of a mystique. So it's one of those weird things that in its lack of a marketing strategy, it is also a marketing strategy somehow. So it's got that sort of weird contradiction, which is very Pynchonian.
Not an easy thing to pull off, but it can work. This person who nobody can sort of find, so then they're curious about him. It creates its own marketing. Whatever.
Yeah, it is. It is. The absence of a strategy is a strategy somehow, and so. Although I'm sure it's a totally earnest thing, like you said.
Yeah,
it goes back to.
But the myth now is such a point that the myth is the thing that sells him. You know, at least as far as what drags the attention. You know, you don't hear anything. He's not. Because he's so private, we don't have any nifty, dirt on him. He is not getting in the way of his work. And that's may or may not be a good thing. Probably more of a good thing than not, but
other writers who do what Pynchon does to a sort of a lesser degree, they try to minimize interviews, but they'll still do a few. And he's just kind of I suppose, the next step down from Salinger. I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds fair.
Yeah. There are other writers who do stick to their guns and just write their books, and they don't do tours and things like that. We could sort of make that the discussion, which I don't think we want to do, but
yeah, most
publishers would not allow that, would they? I mean, Pynchon's been able to pull it off because he got started with it, and it was sort of rolling along before the new strategy, which is authors have to get out there and help a little bit.
that's kind of the whole thing now, in particular with everybody. I mean, in all aspects of publishing. If you got started before the age of the internet, or the mass conglomeration of the publishing houses, then you could do interesting stuff. You could step back from the work. You could be reclusive. You could experiment even. And now it's like, if you've got a thing, you're a brand, and so you've got to just come out with the latest model edition of what you did the last time. And so,
and you've got to go do a few readings.
So I get what you're saying now. When you're saying it would be tough to do that, it would almost not be allowed. Because I don't think it's that hard to disappear if you...
Who in our generation is being allowed to do that? There's got to be a few people out there that would like to be about that under the radar, just because writers tend to be like that anyway. Some people don't like to get up and give speeches. So
yeah.
I mean,
so if they could get out of it, they would.
I think you're probably right. And in this day and age, it's where some people seem to document every minute of their lives, and there's some writers that do that too. Yeah. Writers that I like. I mean, I'm not saying this is a negative thing.
A lot of writers now they're on Twitter. I mean, I'm not that much of a social media person, but even then, you sort of, if you read a good book, then you might Google the author or something. They're very often on Twitter.
Yeah, it's hard to think of someone who isn't, really.
Yeah.
So I should go on with the Pynchon background. I never actually got to his books.
Go for it.
Okay, so 60s he writes V, and he writes The Crying a Lot 49, and those sort of establish him as a literary figure. Crying a Lot 49 is one that we might bring up again, because it is the one that sort of has a sort of an ancestor of Inherent Vice in a way. But then in 70s, 71, I don't know when, he writes Gravity's Rainbow, which wins the National Book Award and sort of makes
74.
Yeah,
73, 74.
Makes his reputation. And since then, he's managed to put out a book, 7 years between, 10 years between. These last two, this one in 2009, Inherent Vice, and then 2013, I believe, Bleeding Edge, I think are the only ones that are quote-unquote detective novels. Mm-hmm. Now, he has so many characters and so much going on in the novels. I'm sure and the Pynchon people are really good at keeping track of all this, so I'm sure I'm missing something that somebody could yell at me about, but I would say that these are actually the first ones where they're actual detectives and they're detective novels.
Right.
And he's now written two in a row at the, I don't want to say the end of his career, but I mean, he's in his 80s now, so that's maybe
in the
something.
twilight of his vigor.
You would assume. I don't know that. He may be going to live forever, but
how are we ready to go with that?
Yeah, go. Where are we going?
Well, I was just, as you mentioned, Bleeding Edge, which I didn't read, so I didn't. It goes into the detective novel.
The protagonist is a female this time, and she's a fraud examiner in New York City, spanning the days of 9/11, like starting before and then going after.
If we think about Inherent Vice, then we have this detective. We actually have a detective in this one, Doc Sportello. He's even a California detective, like Marlowe. Mm-hmm. And what is it with this guy? Because what does Sportello have at stake in the novel? I mean, he's been hired to do a couple of things. Does he have a code then?
Yeah, I think there's the beach code, the stoner's code, that seems to be the best moral code in the novel.
But there's also the code that he's worried about Shasta.
Yeah, that's he has a personal tie. He almost has all of those categories we started to talk about in the beginning, and none of them really dominates in a way, because he seems like he's sort of dealt with the Shasta thing well enough.
But he's worried that she's come to a bad end as a result of being caught up with, is it Mickey Wolfman?
Mickey Wolfman, yeah. It's a personal angle. It's definitely a personal angle. He's definitely been hired professionally, and there is, there's not a sense of.
Was he really hired though? I mean, because I don't remember.
Yeah,
Shasta just kind of asked him to look into something, and
Khalil,
that's when he got.
Tariq Khalil hires him to go check out what's going on with Glenn Sherlock.
Right, but he never got.
He gets
paid.
hired. He gets hired several times,
but he never gets paid.
Well, that's par for the course for PIs, man. I know that firsthand. No, it's not. That's not the issue. You're right. I mean, the fact that he has
You'd
an
think
office.
He could have at least negotiated some grass, but then seems like they're almost always smoking his weed too. But I don't know. There were a few places where, I mean, just the confusion of the plot overwhelms. And so I don't know whose weed it was in a few places.
Lots of people do have it handy, and I think that's why it was a cool place to be, a cool time period to be. I mean, it's a cool time period and not a cool time period. I've always been really fascinated with the sort of post-Manson L.A. scene because it was a...
Right, so this was what, 71, 72?
Yeah, I believe it's 71 that we're talking about.
He's about set it where Robert Altman set his remix of Chandler's The Long Goodbye.
Yeah.
Okay.
And he's kind of trying to do that trippy thing that Altman tried to do with Chandler.
He directly addresses in this novel, though, the impact that the Manson murders had on the culture.
Right.
And it comes up again and again and again. As it would have. It would have been hard to miss.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have talked about Lot 49 and made a point that it sort of taps into the conspiracy culture in the wake of the JFK assassination.
Right.
And the thing that's interesting about that in that novel, the JFK assassination is never mentioned, even though it sort of haunts every page. And in Inherent Vice, the Manson affair is literally mentioned. It seems like, you can't go but a few chapters without having that referred to somehow. And
there's some weird sex fetish thing going on. They're looking for, people to dress up like the Manson girls at one point. Was that Doc or somebody else?
I think I think Doc jokes about it.
Yeah, but it's definitely, it's maybe I was just a little swayed by some of the blurbs with some of this, but it seems like it's more of like there's this, they're also trailing this arc of the death of that ideology right on the cusp of Nixon. After the Manson murders, Nixon's about to happen, and it's this death of the that ideology of the 60s that had a real push behind it, an idealism behind it, and it's that we're almost kind of cataloging that death because you get Wolfman, who's he's first off this big mega real estate guy, gets doped up, has the revelation, starts a thing where people can live for free, and the whole book's about how he gets back to being a greedy bastard. Yeah. And the only person who kind of maintains that purity of that ethos is Doc.
Yeah, he's very Marlowe-like in that sense.
The lawyer, to maybe a lesser degree.
Well, another character, Dinas.
Sancho.
What about Dinas? What a great guy. Everybody liked to live next to Dinas.
Which one is he?
He's the neighbor who lives downstairs, or no, not quite downstairs, because the waterbed comes through from the upstairs. Oh. But yeah, okay. The guy who winds up watching the heroin, and thinking it's a television. Yeah,
I forgot the pronunciation guide. By the time I got about halfway through the book, I was back to calling him Dennis.
No, it's Dinas.
Definitely. I remember now.
He just is. He's not a Dennis. He's just a Dinas. But he's a nice guy, and so are a lot of the other people that are in the counterculture there. But, yeah, they're all about to be sort of swarmed over and flooded by late capitalism. And that's kind of... That Manson affair was sort of identified as being the sort of the end of the counterculture idealism. And so...
And Nixon just raped the corpse, I guess.
Yeah, I mean the Vigilant California. Yeah, thanks for throwing that in. That was a good image of Vigilant California. Yeah, I think to me it sort of fits with an overall Pynchon aesthetic, which his physics stuff, he's really concerned with this concept of entropy,
Right.
which I don't really understand because I don't know all that kind of science stuff. But people in the books find themselves in very, very wonderful, nice situations in life that are not really of their own making. And then those situations ultimately decay, almost sort of naturally just decay.
Right.
And in
That's
response to that,
interesting.
they see conspiracies everywhere and they want to blame someone. And there are all these people running around, vigilantes and mafia types and corporate types and FBI types that are very worth blaming. But ultimately, when you get down to sort of the core of it in a Pynchon novel, it's probably not even really all that. It's just the natural decay of the universe. You have a great moment and it goes away.
So what about this paragraph then on that subject? This seemed to be happening more and more lately out in greater Los Angeles, among gatherings of carefree youth and happy dopers where Doc had begun to notice older men, there and not there, rigid, unsmiling, that he knew he'd seen before, not the faces necessarily, but a defiant posture, an unwillingness to blur out, like everybody else at the psychedelic events those days, beyond official envelopes of skin, like the operatives who dragged away Coy Harlingen the other night at that rally at the Century Plaza. Doc knew these people. He'd seen enough of them in the course of business. They went out to collect cash debts. They broke rib cages. They got people fired. They kept an unforgiving eye on anything that might become a threat. If everything in this dream of pre-revolution was in fact doomed to end, and the faithless, money-driven world to reassert its control over all the lives it felt entitled to touch, fondle, and molest, it would be agents like these, dutiful and silent, out doing the shit work, who'd make it happen.
Yeah, I think he would. There's a sense that is this sort of force of the universe in decay, but a specific historical reference. I think that's just COINTELPRO. That's just the infiltration of the left by, government agents that are agent provocateurs and
So do you think
moles and things.
he's a big reader of Elroy? Because this, towards the end, had some echoes, bringing in COINTELPRO and some other stuff like that.
Yeah,
Had some echoes of American tabloid.
it's sort of an anti-Elroy. I never thought of it that way, but there is a sense where,
He kind of loses the narrative drive in the middle like Elroy does.
I did wander in the middle, yeah.
It's something that's sacrificed with is it Pynchon's? I've been trying to decide what it is that sort of undermines his narrative drive. I'm interested in Sportello. I like him. I want to follow him around. And there's a few places in the book where I'm just kind of getting him. I know it's Pynchon. I know he's great. And even then I'm getting tired of him. And I don't know what it is. It's just the plot's too messy, maybe. Who knows?
So is the plot messy? Do you think the plot is messy by accident? The writers, being lazy, or is the plot messy because it's filtered through Sportello and he's high?
The thing is, though, Raymond Chandler's plots are about as messy. James Crumley's plots are messy, but they don't lose the drive. Maybe they do in a book or two,
right?
But generally, Chandler, he keeps you going,
right?
So even though it's messy, you're still kind of driving through the book on the detectives part of it,
right?
While enjoying the narration too. I don't know if it's the style here. If the style is just so thick, I'm not quite convinced that Pynchon's foray into detective fiction actually fits his prose style that well. I'm just throwing that out there. I haven't really thought it all the way through.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because the earlier novels sort of use elements of the genre, and yet these are actually using the genre. I
Right.
mean, this Inherent Vice is a detective novel, and so you're sort of questioning if
Just
that
questioning
sets
if,
you as gives you false expectations as a reader that you're going to be able to track the plot. And
well, that I'm going to be just driving through the book from an interest level and
Right.
interested enough in the plot to wonder what's going on. And at some point, it just feels like we know that Mickey Wolfman's missing, and we know that the boat is out in the bay sometimes coming back and forth. And there's this talk of, what is it, Lemuria? I didn't look up how to. I was fascinated by Lemuria and some of those scenes where it sort of comes in.
Right. The hallucinations.
I
and
loved that stuff. That was great stuff. Somewhere in there, I did kind of lose the incentive, and I
Yeah,
don't know what
know.
happened.
I don't know. I mean, I guess
Was it after he came back from Vegas? Was that when you kind of lost it?
I don't know. When did he come back from Vegas?
Well, after stopping after making
goes
the
out to
bet on
see the
whether,
Zomes.
yeah, after he goes on the way back to see the Zomes, and he has that wandering around out there, and then it's after he places that bet with the casino on whether or not Wolfman will come back and how.
He wins.
And
Gets
he
$10,000.
Yeah, so that's how he got paid. He didn't get paid by any of his clients.
I guess I was surprised this time. I've read this is like I think the third time I've been through it, and I was surprised with how coherent it seemed. Because I think I remember the first time too. In any Pynchon novel, there is this sort of sense of you just sort of get lost in this world, and if that world is not at a very high level of entertainment for your imagination, it could be pretty easy to
Right.
lose the thread. But I think the plot's actually sort of vaguely coherent.
Maybe it is.
Now that I read it 3 times.
It's vague. It is. I don't know if it was just the sort of a lot of the scenes, the character, the talk is similar,
Yeah.
and I couldn't tell if some of it could have been cut. I hate to say that, but it's kind of like the scenes went on a bit, and I just felt like it could have been a little tighter. You can't really say that about a Pynchon novel, probably. But
Well,
You see why not?
I mean, my only other experience with Pynchon is The Crying of Lot 49, which was a nice short little book. It's shorter than this one, but my recollections of that and this one together is that there's a certain amount of, I guess you would call it almost magical happenstance. Stuff just appears, out of the blue to shift the plot. And that's maybe part of what's the mystery thing he was doing before and how he's trying to do the whole thing. And so, and Mason and Dixon's been sitting on my shelf for 20 years and I haven't read it. I might have lost it actually in a move. I don't know. Anyway, but my kind of impression, just from what I've read about him and what I've read through these 2 books, is that there is kind of in a Joycean way this tendency of him to construct the prose in a way that it mirrors something or reflects something else that he's doing. So doesn't he have another novel out there that's written in various early prose styles?
It's probably Mason and Dixon.
Maybe, yeah. And
could be against.
So if my thing is, when the story did start wandering, because I did get lost, right after they got back from the trip to Vegas, it did kind of tend to drift for me. That's why I was trying to pinpoint when it started to drift for you. And I chalked it up to, it's a pot smoker's narrative, and so he's getting fuzzy because he's stoned or he's high, or we're getting this filtered through that, sense of, of dazed and confused and wandering. And I was waiting for a Munchie scene, and I guess we got some, but
I think it's something like that, but it's not just that he's inhabiting the reality of somebody who's stoned.
Uh-huh.
Pynchon seems to me willing to want to explore something as a metaphor, and by gosh, it's going in the plot, whether
Right.
it slows down things or not. And the thing that jumps immediately to mind is, I don't know if you remember, they're in the restaurant. I'm trying to remember who he goes to the restaurant with, but there's the hedge, like the fake plastic hedge in the restaurant.
I think that's with the lawyer.
Does he go there with Sancho?
Yeah.
Sancho.
I think he does go with Sancho.
Yeah.
But that
And he keeps thinking he's going to reach back in there and root around for some drugs or something that somebody dropped back there.
Yeah, and something like that will show up and get a bunch of description, mainly because I think Pynchon sees that as metaphorical or some concept he's trying to say
Right.
about decay or the notion of memory and things getting lost in memory.
Right.
It echoes the scene near the El Drano, the drug dealer, not river, but the place out there where they dredge it.
The canal.
Yes, it's a canal. That's a good word. Everybody has to run out and look for their stuff. Right? And so there's that hedge. So things like that will come up again and again in the novel that really, stopping and looking at a fake hedge in a restaurant or being worried about what's going on in this canal have nothing to do really with figuring out what's going on or us knowing, who's behind what, but they're metaphors that Pynchon is determined to have in there. And if I had to pinpoint something that maybe is a problem for narrative drive, I bet that might be it. What do you think of that? Scene like that where you're reading about this hedge and you're just going like, oh my gosh, why? Lot 49 has a lot of that too. The painting early in the novel where they talk about the painting as a metaphor.
Right. Yeah, it's
on and on and on for pages about,
I read 49 when I was as an undergrad, so my memories of it are just very blurry and impressionistic at this point.
So do we think of Doc then as is he sort of a variation on the knight errant, or is he picaresque? He's a little bit of both, isn't he?
I think he's obviously picaresque, but I think that your point about him being the knight errant is more insightful. I don't think we think of that way, but he is the one guy that has a pretty strong code all the way through here. It's not the same code of bourgeois America.
Right.
Being on a substance is not a problem. Having casual sex is not a problem in this code. But it's a pretty darn good code when you compare it to what's going on at Parker Center and the LAPD.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, and the cop, Bigfoot
and the whole LAPD and the whole Republican.
The characters in this whole thing are just constantly living in terms of what they have to do to get around. They know that they actually can't tell the police anything.
Well, I don't know. My opinion of Bigfoot kind of softened the later I got into the story. By the end of it, I didn't think he was such a terrible guy. When he first shows up, you're like, what a fucking dick. But he's still manipulative as hell. But at least he was trying to do something decent within the system he had himself locked into, trying to find out who killed his partner, or at least get that killer taken care of. But still, very.
Well, and any character that comes along is going to be interesting in a way that we don't associate with other detective novels, because Bigfoot calls himself a Renaissance man, and he kind of is. He has interests. I mean, which person is it? I think that Mickey Wolfsman's wife, right, is the one that's into like cinematography. And
yeah,
she offers this running critique of this one cinematographer and his work. So every character who shows up, even people that you would assume would be very simplistic characters, have these wild esoteric interests that they'll just bust out in the novel. So that too is also leads to tangents. Sloane.
So what do you think all the fictional bands represented or meant? Because they were mixed in there with a lot of real stuff.
Yeah.
But
did you read all the songs?
I don't read them. I sing them. Don't you? I thought everybody did. Don't you stop and start singing when you see a song?
Not if I don't know what the melody is.
What's melody? Oh, okay. You haven't heard me sing, obviously. You
killing me, Smalls.
You wouldn't. And that's just textbook Pynchon. Is every novel I think has got people burst into song. Yeah.
Do you think he likes musicals?
I imagine he likes everything. I don't. So what are you saying? You skipped the songs? It's the best part, man.
I suppose if I know I'm kind of like Jason. If I know the melody, then I'm down with it.
Otherwise, it's just like reading a poem.
It is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think you kind of supply your own. I mean, he gives you like a genre of what where the kind of song it is, or when they're singing a country song in the casino that one point,
right?
Or it's a surf tune, and you just kind of. Even didn't you like the one about what's the one about the pawnbroker man when the repossessed man come? I thought that would be just totally blues that you would want to do some Little Walter with.
I wonder if Pynchon really cares about the narrative drive that much.
I doubt he cares at all.
I don't think he cares that much.
But then again, I say that and I contradict myself because it does make sense.
Yeah.
I think the first time I read it, I think I got to the end, I thought this is just this wild trip, and I don't necessarily care that the plot is nonsense. But again, going through it again and again, you kind of see that there actually is the whole Adrian Prussia story, and that props up this story, and then you know that what the Golden Fang is at the end, and it does make sense. But no, I bet he doesn't care at all.
So was ARPANET really up and running in the early 70s? The baby internet?
I didn't double check, but that's
because that was an
use
interesting...
the Google. I don't know.
Well, how nightmarish is the Golden Fang?
Not very.
Man, did you see that guy in the heroin dream with the gold fangs? Man, that's scary. It's everybody's worst fear. I think it's like the Trastero in Lot 49. I don't know that it's anything. Which again is that's where I get my thematic interpretation of these books, is that as much as there are all these horrible, evil people out there who are trying to control us politically, a lot of the terrible decay that happens in society isn't really, the conspiracy theory is not real. And I don't think that you really, the Golden Fang is a symbol, not a reality.
It's the manifestation of a conspiracy theory, and then by the end of the book, it's dissolved and revealed itself. Is that what you're as nothing but a bunch of, BS? Is that what it's?
It has more power as a metaphor than it does.
Right.
Just like JFK's assassination being a conspiracy has more power as a metaphor than it does as a historical event. Actually, I'm just saying that because I know the Golden Fang is very real, and I don't want them to come looking for me. So I'm just going to bullshit all the way through this and say there's no Golden Fang.
It helps that you're inland. Let me just put that out there.
That's true.
You can't be swept up onto a
You're
schooner
landlocked.
from here.
Right, and no schooners on Lake Shawnee, so I'll be okay. But no, I think that's what I think it is. I think it's in a way not dismissing the horrors of capitalism and authoritarianism and all of these forces that the characters at the beach think are evil. But the beach just has to naturally, with time, go away. And if we go to the beach now, none of these people are there, and nobody can afford to be there unless you have $1 billion.
And it's covered in plastic.
That too. Yeah, the natural part of it is not really a big thing that comes up in this novel, but that would be just part of the same part of the theory that we're destroying the planet, and culture is decaying, and it's just this big thing, entropy.
Yep.
Interesting thing about the beach that I thought of, I actually heard somebody else say this, though. I think it was on the Pynchon in Public podcast that one of the guys said this, but I don't know who to give credit for. But Gordita Beach is obviously a version of Manhattan Beach, which is where Pynchon lived in the early 70s. And so if you want to have a really fun sort of mental exercise, you can imagine Doc running through his paces and an apartment probably down the Strand or up the street. There's this writer Thomas Pynchon sitting there banging out Gravity's Rainbow on a typewriter, because that's where he really, this time period in that setting is where that novel was written.
Oh, so overall, what did you think of this one? Where did it land in our framework, in our pantheon? I mean, we had talked a little bit about this earlier, whether or not he was a knight errant or whether this was some personal thing. You know, how did this fit? And then we also talked about reading this one as kind of this departure or a different take on the detective novel, or at least the classic style of detective or crime novel. So what about this makes it different and a departure or a reinvention or an imagining that you think of the detective novel? Is it just that he's a stoner? Is it that it has all this metaphor and allusion to it?
For me, what makes this book unique in the detective genre pantheon is the writing style. That's what does it for me. The other writers, even if they have poetic inclination, even Chandler tends to stay with the shorter sentences and the punchier prose. And variations on that are all pretty much in that vein. I mean, so Pynchon's prose style for me is definitely the departure. He doesn't do that.
Right.
He doesn't. He's not mimicking any kind of hard-boiled prose, and I don't think he ever does. It's always going to be the long, winding, ornate prose, and not. You're never going to get a Chandler-esque.
No, and that's not what you go get a Pynchon novel for to begin with. But yeah, if we're talking about where this fits in that genre,
right,
I would put it in the writing style, because really, I mean, Sportello, as we've mentioned, he's almost, you can do a compare-contrast with Marlowe. He's fairly honorable. He's kind of like Marlowe. He doesn't get paid, but he still tries to kind of find out what's going on anyway.
Right.
He cares about Shasta, even though she kind of ditched him for Mickey. And he's a pretty nice guy.
Carries a gun, but doesn't ever seem to use it.
Right.
Till the end.
I suppose the drug culture background is a departure, but Pynchon wouldn't be the first one to have done that. I'm not going to be able to think of a bunch of different novels at the moment, but I bet we could if we worked at it a little bit.
I would almost want to go so far as to do like a postmodern detective novel as a subgenre of detective novel.
Uh-huh.
And in that sense, Inherent Vice is not unique. It's probably, well, no, it's there are tons of novels that use experimental style,
right,
that take on the detective genre and embrace it. And I think the reason is Chandler or any kind of classic detective fiction seems in a way a metaphor for the reader. It's got sort of a built-in metaphor in the sense that we're all, to some extent, a detective.
Right.
Right. We have a big mystery in front of us, and that we don't know how we got here, why we're here, where we're going. So life is a mystery, quote unquote.
Right.
So I think that the traditional realistic detective novels sort of have that metaphor built in. What a postmodernist does is comes along and sort of makes that front and center. And so all of the sort of the notions that weird happenstances and Lemuria will rise, or you'll go on a drug trip and actually see the future, the fact that those things will just simply happen in the novel,
right,
is because the fact that they're sort of taking this metaphor of the quest for a mystery and just making it obvious.
Right.
It's no longer ensconced in the plot. It is now the focus of the novel. So, in that sense, I guess Inherent Vice is typical to some extent.
Yeah, I'm still trying to sort it out, because I like we talked about before, I really got lost after the return from Vegas, and
What?
I would not have thought to really compare the length of line between Chandler and Pynchon as much of a marked difference. I suppose I chalked a lot of it up to
Doc.
Well, to Doc and the fact that you have a writer that's known for being pretty solid on the focalization, on filtering the story through whoever the controlling consciousness is. So Doc's a wanderer. So the story's going to wander. That seems pretty traditional to the detective genre, particularly if it's something, as a first-person narrator, like or a very close third, just focusing and following that detective, is that it's going to, that voice, that tone of whoever that detective is the thing that's going to be at the center of the narration. So I would not have. It wouldn't have occurred to me to think about the length of the line like that. So that seems pretty standard as far as I would go. I did not find there was a lot of talk in reviews and in the blurbs and all the stuff that this was, had comedy and humor in it. There was a few moments of chuckles, but I was expecting something a little bit more funny, and it really kind of wasn't.
The long sentences in my mind don't lend themselves to comic timing very well.
Yeah.
It's a very dry sense of humor. You get a line, and it's not a line that's, I think, overtly.
Because when I think of that a book from that era as something comedic and heavy on the drug thing, I would lean more towards like Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. That one was absurd and it was funny, but that was that didn't quite happen. Fear and Loathing had the drug culture moved into it, the late 60s and all that stuff like that. That was in that weird gonzo journalism running into it, and it was and Thompson made it funny. And this was. Maybe I had some expectations that this would have some echoes with that as well, because it's from that same era, and it just didn't quite nail it for me.
I suspected that I was missing out on a little bit of stoner humor, just because, I went to college a long time ago, and it's been a while, and so I hadn't thought, I wasn't in on the inside joke to a certain extent. I suspect this is funnier if you're a practicing pot smoker. I'm just guessing.
Maybe. the waterbed coming through the floor, that was funny. But it was kind of about the...
I hadn't really thought about trying to quantify the humor, so I'm kind of... I found it to be tremendously hilarious. And I'm trying to explain why, and I don't know if I can. It's these dry lines where you end a scene. And the first one I turn to is just when he's trying to have a conversation with Sortilege, but they're worried about the fact that they can't tell what's on their pizza, and the scene just ends with, "That's a marshmallow," Dina said. So to me, that is a tremendously funny line. That's not it's not ridiculous like cocaine flying out the convertible in Fear and Loathing,
right?
Which made me laugh as well. But this line, just trying to identify ingredients on a pizza is I find hilarious, and I don't know if I can explain why. But to me it's in the lines, particularly lines that end sections where they're just this sort of flat ending, and you're sort of left with the really utterly ridiculous statement. That and some of the language. Some of the jokes about Bigfoot. Bigfoot is always referred to in such a humorous way, as far as civil rights hating, and even some of his dialogue where he makes fun of the hippie lifestyle is pretty hilarious.
Bigfoot's a pretty good speaker, though.
Yeah, and that's that thing with Pynchon, and he's going to have a character. It's not going to be the standard stereotype of a cop, or whatever our stereotypes of cops are. I don't know, but here's a guy who can
He's
talk.
He's a creative talker.
He's a creative talker, yes.
Yeah.
He would fit in an Elroy. It'd be good to take Bigfoot. Bigfoot is almost like a parody of an Elroy character. I never thought about this, but we should turn him loose in American tabloid and see how he does. It probably wouldn't be funny anymore, though.
Yeah. Overall, I mean, I liked it. I don't. I guess I was expecting a bit of a bigger bang out of it, and didn't get it. So I just need to adjust my expectations.
Am I wrong that it fizzles kind of at the end? Not that I really care. I didn't expect it to get a big bang at the end, but
Why do you keep looking at me when you say that?
it's because I'm having to lean into my
No, I know. I'm
microphone,
just kidding.
Paul.
I am.
It's all about the mics.
I'm a big.
Yeah, got to get that voice right in the tube there.
I'm a big fan of the book.
Yeah,
It would be one of my favorites. And so, does it fizzle at the end? No. Is it funny? Yeah. But I don't know if I can defend that or not. Like I said, this time through, the thing that amazed me is that it makes sense. I remember my first reading feeling like I was getting towards the end of the narrative in Las Vegas, and then with the Zomes, and then scenes after that when we start to resolve the Coy Harlingen narrative, and it just kept going on. And ultimately, I see this time through that every narrative line actually kind of gets resolved. He doesn't really leave any loose threads,
right?
To the point where even Trillium Fortnight in the last second to the last scene, we at least find out that she's okay, and so everything that adds on. I mean, that whole last scene with the Golden Fang schooner is resolving a plot line. So.
Okay,
I didn't expect that, but it really does. But question:
Are his names? I don't remember his names in the Crying of Lot 49 being this.
Yes.
Artificial.
Yes. He in fact had some guy who was going to sue him for the attorney Genghis Cohen.
Oh, yeah?
And Pynchon, one of the rare times when Pynchon did sort of have a public statement, he issued a statement in the New York Times saying that if this guy thinks he's the only one juvenile enough to come up with humor like Genghis Cohen, then his problems are not so much legal as mental, and we hope that he works them out. So, no, he's been doing this. Again, Pynchon, you could go back to the early short stories and follow him through, and you're going to get song lyrics, you're going to get pornographic scenes, you're going to get goofy names. But
interesting.
They're pretty goofy.
Yeah. Because I never quite know how to feel about those types of names. And I think maybe it goes back to just a moment that I had in graduate school. Because I tend to opt for rather normal names and sometimes, gender neutral names for characters. That's about as crazy as I get with naming characters. And I remember being criticized in a workshop.
Oh no!
For having these, simple, normal names, and then the person that did that criticizing, turns around, hands in a short story, and people are named like Walrus and Gopher, and it's like, are these nicknames? No, that's their name. Why?
Was it postmodern?
No, it was. I remember the story vaguely being something about drugs.
You're gonna have to cuddle this out because that guy's probably out there and he's gonna hear this and he's gonna be really hurt.
No, it was a woman.
Oh, okay. Well,
she doesn't listen.
She's
to
gonna be. She doesn't listen to your podcast.
No.
Okay. It is sort of a trademark of postmodernism, and in a very simple way, it's that sort of acknowledging the fact that we have a story, whereas a typical quote-unquote realistic approach to fiction is that we are holding a mirror up to reality, and so what we're seeing is a potential reality. Whereas postmodernists say, well, that's bullshit. We're not holding a mirror up to anything. This is a fictional reality, and therefore we're going to have wild fictional names.
I thought the trippy names went very well with this trippy novel. I mean, if ever there was a novel to have a character named Trillium Fortnight.
Trillium.
This was it.
Poor Trillium. That damn Puck Beaverton. But no, it's not just this book, and it's not just Pynchon. It's kind of a
so
thing.
it's a thing
It's a
for
thing.
him, and do they have a meaning behind them, or some intended metaphor or an allusion to something? I mean, Genghis Khan seems pretty obvious what that one's about, and
I'd say each one probably
at least
does if you think about it.
Something it's just not a lazy attempt at metafiction.
I would say what we've got going on in a postmodern narrative like this is the way that a realistic narrative could essentially be masking the chaos of life. Life is really chaotic with bizarre outcomes that you can't predict and crazy situations leading to other crazy situations. And to some extent, a realistic plot masks what really goes on.
Right.
And so speculative fiction, science fiction, postmodern type writing can be, in a way, giving you a more realistic depiction of reality than realistic fiction.
Right.
And all of these techniques, which seem to be, that's ridiculous, people don't have names like that, seem to be gestures in that regard.
Okay.
To say, hey, wake up and look at how bizarre people are.
Right.
And I'm going to show you that, and part of the gesture is going to be, we're going to have a guy, and he's going to be Denis instead of Dennis.
Right.
That may not work, but that's, I think, what's going on aesthetically.
Okay.
Hell, I don't know.
Works for me.
Well, if I'm satisfied, Jason, then I can explain it to you. I'm set.
Brautigan?
Are we ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brautigan, of course, was born in 1935. He in Washington, and had a kind of a rough childhood. His mother had a lot of different boyfriends and husbands, and he didn't really know who his father was until late in life. Didn't meet him until late in life. And, in fact, his biological father apparently did not realize Richard Brautigan was his son until after Brautigan's death. And, of course, Richard first got recognition as a poet. Started writing novels in the early 60s, and, of course, spent most of his life struggling with alcohol and depression, and spent time in a state hospital and was subjected to, I believe, 12 different sessions of electroshock therapy. And his two biggest novels, which, of course, were Trout Fishing in America and Watermelon Sugar, were out in the 60s and kind of made him famous, made his literary thing. His agent managed to secure him a lot of money in the early 70s, so he never really had the kind of financial problems that he had growing up, which is where he would go days without eating and did some minor jail time for throwing a rock through a window at a police station. And in the early 80s, his depression and drinking got particularly bad, and he ended up killing himself in Bolinas, California, and was not discovered for about a month until a private investigator went around looking and found him. And, of course, now I'm going to do a little plug for a friend. Now, I haven't read this book yet, but if you're interested in somebody's experience of Brautigan, this book is Downstream from Trout Fishing in America, a memoir of Richard Brautigan. It's by one of Richard's friends, Keith Abbott. Keith Abbott was one of my professors at Naropa University. It's from Astrophil Press, which is run by another friend of mine from graduate school. So it's out there and available if you want to read about Richard Brautigan and his friendship in particular with Keith Abbott and what he thinks about Brautigan's life and writing. And it's a very humane book, we're told here. Raymond Carver says, truly the best thing I've ever seen written on the man. You, meaning Abbott, write of him with love and affection. That's obvious, but also with deep and clear understanding. It's really quite good. And a cautionary tale as well, as far as, writers and alcohol and all that good stuff. So we're discussing Dreaming of Babylon, which again we took, I guess, as part of our departure from the traditional detective and crime thing, and this one went pretty damn fast, and was to me quite strange. And we have a PI, but it's not really a detective story. It's more of a crime story, as he's hired to commit a crime that he...
I suppose the only detective element would just be we're not quite sure why they want him to do it.
Right.
Take the body out of the morgue. We're not sure who's going to hire him, and then we're not sure why when they do hire him, they want the body taken out. If we can, but yeah, I mean, we're so far into farce with this thing. That
Right. Yeah.
Brautigan seems to me to have a style that's like no one else.
That's, yeah.
Did it strike you that way, or am I just kind of...
I've never read anything like this before.
Yeah, so...
Well, Hawkline Monster, which is another Brautigan novel.
Yeah, he seems like, when you talk about his biography there, he seems like sort of this odd footnote to the beat writers, because I see him kind of thrown in there, I think because of the time period, but he seems wholly different in a way too. I mean, he seems like his own... there's just Brautigan, and he's just Brautigan. Is that...
I just feel like if Brautigan had lived, we would have had a sequel, Dreaming of Something Else or whatever, and in that one, C-Card can't find any water for his water pistol. I mean, Brautigan could get a novel out of that.
Yeah, I agree. But it's something about his style that's just sort of uniquely... I mean, talk about humor.
Yeah.
He just puts the most ridiculous thing on the page.
Well, sure, we're into the first 40 pages, and he's just finally got some bullets. Going around, he can't get bullets. He doesn't have any money.
He's got
to con people just to get food.
Right. Can't even get money from his mother, who's putting him on a constant guilt trip for killing his father when he was 4.
Yeah.
It's hysterical.
It is. Isn't it? I mean...
But like all comic novels, I mean, the risk is always just that, do you have enough going to drive it?
Right.
For me, this one, I mean, because there's nothing at stake of any value. I mean, it's just you're with C-Card, I suppose, and I don't know what's really driving you other than you're just along for the comical ride.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, you want to see if he's going to get some money. I mean, that seems to be the thing that drives his motivation is cash, because he wants a car and a secretary he can fuck.
Somewhat of a mystery, the socialite who drinks beer. We kind of wonder just why she is doing what she's doing, I think. And I don't know that we get...
I like how that's the one thing that everybody that encounters her just obsesses about. Where does she put the beer?
Yeah.
Why didn't she go to the bathroom?
Do we really get an answer as to what?
No.
Okay, good.
You don't get any answer on her at all.
Yeah, so there's, to some extent, there's some mystery there, I suppose, in the actual plot, theoretically. But it's really, it's not the point. The point is the...
What's he saying?
Humorous.
What is he trying to say anything here? I mean, okay, Dreaming of Babylon.
I have a theory.
Okay.
If you want
Go for
to
it.
entertain my theory. I feel like you have the Dream of Babylon as one level of the metaphor.
Uh-huh.
And then... one level above that, somebody's dreaming of C-Card. And so that would be, I guess, Brautigan or us. We're following this fictional dream. And within that dream, there is this dream that we are told has essentially derailed this guy's life.
After he got beamed.
Yes. His intense imagination, his ability to go to this wonderful place, Babylon, has caused him to fail at the normal social achievements you would expect from someone, because he's always distracted by this creativity.
Right.
And so to me, it seemed like it was a meditation on this whole notion of the creative force and what kind of creative force is socially acceptable and what isn't. And I mean, think of you sitting on your back porch and going off on a daydream about something happening. And compare that to J.J. Abrams writing a script for the next fantastical.
Right.
Does he even write? I think maybe he hires someone to write it, but he's dreaming up these fantastical ideas. His fantastical dreams are socially rewarded in culture, and he's a genius, and you're just a nobody on your back porch. And I think it's along those lines that the novel really kind of has something to say in a way, too, about that creative force. I mean, there's guys like Rink who would have none of that.
Right.
And they're going to do well in society because you're not supposed to go off dreaming of Babylon. And those that do, where is there a ability for you to achieve or do something socially acceptable with that creativity? And the only answer is in writing a cheesy detective novel. Because notice how C. Card's dreams are framed by these cheap movies that he's seen. These serial.
I personally, I just love the subtitle for this damn thing. Dreaming of Babylon, a private eye novel, 1942. Okay. Well, and okay.
So that fits into what I'm saying, is that this idea that we have the dream, which is going to only destroy poor C. Card's existence, and the only creative outlet for that dream, which is going to work, is in the form of a product, a script for a serial at the drive-in movie, or a paperback novel that's going to sit on the shelf and sell. It's sort of a...
What about his girlfriend in Babylon? Mm-hmm. Was it Nina Durant?
Nina Durant. Yeah, she's something else.
Durant. She's sort of she's very much a fantasy girl, though, isn't she? I mean, she's C. Card's supporter no matter what he does.
Yep. And she's shaped by those serial...
She's the dream girlfriend.
B movies.
Right.
Affectionate, loving. He's a loser, but it's okay with Nina Durant.
It's because in Babylon he's not a loser.
Yeah, but he's not a
True.
loser. Yeah, so he's not a loser there.
You know,
be interesting to see what happened if he screwed something up in Babylon.
So
maybe that would eventually he'd get to that.
I dug out Penguin Dictionary of Symbols.
I wonder what you had that
Do you
there
care?
for. Yeah, we want to hear.
Yeah.
Can I read the Babylon paragraph?
Yeah.
And we'll see how this goes. Babylon as a symbol is the antithesis of paradise and the heavenly Jerusalem, although etymologically Babylon means the gateway of God. But although the God to whom that gate led was for a time sought in the heavens, it degenerated from a spirit into a human, with all man's basest instincts of lust and oppression predominant. Babylon, wrote Herodotus, is so splendid that no city on earth may be compared with it. Its walls and its hanging gardens were among the 7 wonders of the world, but all was annihilated because all was based upon temporal values alone. Babylon symbolizes not magnificence doomed by its beauty, but a vitiated magnificence which is self-condemned because it turns humanity away from its spiritual calling. Babylon symbolizes the fleeting victory of the material world of the senses which, by exaggerating one aspect only, causes personality to disintegrate as a result. To some medieval Irish writers, Babylon symbolized paganism, and it is there that the children of Calatin, I suppose, went to learn the arts of magic to kill the hero Cuchulainn. The symbolism differs little from that of the Old Testament writers, from which clearly it is borrowed. So, I don't know that Brautigan was tying in with that or not.
Well, it's no accident, right, that we've got a place like Babylon, which does have that symbolism of the individual indulging.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's indulging in his fantasies to the greatest extent. I mean, if you forget to get off your bus,
I could
you're
signify
indulging.
Having read Dreaming of Babylon, I could signify with this. Babylon symbolizes the fleeting victory of the material world of the senses, which, by exaggerating one aspect only, causes personality to disintegrate as a result. Maybe.
Yeah.
But
Well, Card's personality is certainly disintegrated by the time we encounter him here.
he's totally, all he's worth is just, he's trying to get some money, so he's just not a complete disaster.
Right.
But even what his goal in succeeding in life, being a PI, is a literary device.
Right.
In this sense. I mean, we're not encountering an attempt to render a realistic portrait of an individual struggling with his problem of being too dreamy and he has to get his act together and go live. I mean, we're in a story. The story of C. Card is as fake as his Dreams of Babylon. It's as much an obvious literary joke going on. And the PI aspect is funny. I mean, I don't think we're supposed to take that.
Right. It's whimsical humor.
Yeah, so I'm saying if we're really, this isn't a real portrait of someone's psyche destroyed by too much indulgence in dream. I mean,
No, I agree.
I think we get to the
Whimsical comedy.
I think Babylon's wonderful. I think Dreaming of Babylon is a wonderful thing to do. I think when we get to the end that if anything, that's the sort of point we make, is that creativity is this very powerful, magical force.
Right.
Do we really get Babylon in his daydreams, though? It's almost like he's brought Babylon to his world.
Right.
You've got baseball,
Yeah.
pre-596 BC baseball season.
Oh, actually, they did play baseball in Babylon. That's established. You just have to read the right archaeologist. They
And
did find-
Nebuchadnezzar sits in a. What does Nebuchadnezzar do? He's in a cafe, or
Yeah,
he doesn't have old Babylonian things to do. They're not having the birds fly out or anything. It's
Right.
So it's C. Card's world in Babylon.
C.
Right.
Card was too busy dreaming of Babylon to pay attention in history class to know what Babylon was.
Right. Well,
No, that was actually
I think it's just it might just be a name placeholder for him in certain ways. He gets to throw in the Hanging Gardens, but when he comes up with Smith versus the Shadow, whatever, that's we know that he comes right out and tells us that he pulls in the doctor. Can't remember his name right now. Doctor.
Yeah,
Something that he's
Feingold or something like that.
Yeah, that's like he's pulling directly from Flash Gordon. Ming the Merciless was who that was supposed to be, ripped from, right? So he's pulling Flash Gordon into Old Babylon, or his version of Old Babylon. So it's a pastiche of all these different things that he's just throwing into this guy's imagination, and it's this thing that distracts him from having a functional life. And I'm wondering if somehow this is a reflection of Brautigan's own mental state at this time. This is his post, electroshock therapy stuff. This is the mid to late 70s when this comes out, and he's, getting close to the end. How is this?
Sorry, I missed part of your biography, but did Brautigan have money problems?
Not at the end, no.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I was going to say
He
it
had
looks
as a youth very
Right.
severely, yeah.
Yeah.
And, growing up.
But
a lot of writers have money problems.
Yeah.
But
In the late 60s, early 70s, his agent did a really good job of securing, at the time, what his literary legacy was. So he was making quite a bit of money.
okay.
And I think Abbott talks about that in Downstream. So he was making trips to Japan, which is where his stuff was popular, because he kind of lost favor in the 70s with literary culture in the States, but he was still popular in Europe and in Japan, and I think that's where the financial stability came from, because in fact, his third wife was Japanese. So,
But I wouldn't want to put the focus too much on Brautigan and his situation, because the person who is experiencing the pastiche
right,
and this dream is us, the reader. I mean, again, to me, the C. Card narrative is as much as of a ridiculous pastiche as C. Card's Dreams in Babylon.
Right.
It's just one level removed. So who ultimately is dreaming that dream of C. Card? Again, I think it's the reader. I think there's this weird effect where the book sort of puts you in a state. I mean, like you said, you can read it so fast. It's kind of hard to stop reading.
Mm-hmm.
And you almost get in the sense where, like, I really got stuff to do. I should put this book down, right? And you're sort of stuck at being in C. Card's dreams. His dreams are hilarious.
Short chapters, comical endings to the chapters with those little wry little twist lines.
Yeah,
and then you see the next headline for the next chapter, and so that's hilarious. Smith, blah blah blah. And it's, and so you go ahead and you read the next one.
So you're stuck in a dream. You're stuck in this ridiculous pastiche story in the same way that C. Card can't quite get away from wanting to be back there with Nina Durant. That's what I'm saying. It's sort of, I don't know, performative, or at least it sets this level where we're supposed to be theoretically skeptical of his guy's problems with dreaming, and yet we're experiencing at that same time how wonderful that kind of creative force is, where you can actually live in your own world, At least I often do live in my completely own world. So
I like it.
I mean, that's what I mean to me, and particularly as writers, you don't have to be J.J. Abrams to be serious about your art. You can be published, and you can be on the tenure track and doing these things that you're going to, this person is running for office. This person just got promoted and is a manager. This person just published a novel. These are socially acceptable achievements. And yet there are a ton of people out there who sit down and write their stories and are not achieving that. And for them, the act of creative writing is very much, I think, a C. Card Dreaming of Babylon. It still has that magical power. It doesn't have the same meaning in capitalism, but it still has that same power. And so I think that we get to the end here, and as ridiculous as it sounds, I think this Dream of Babylon is
so what you're saying
kind of redeemed.
Is that all three of us here being writers, at some point we're going to end up in a cemetery waiting, to get picked up by our mothers.
Shit, I already have. So, yeah, I'm thinking of myself. I mean, I sit down to try to write a story, and that notion of taking it seriously as a something you're accomplishing as the guy to put opposite of this would be someone who's a public intellectual.
Right.
This seems to me like it's interesting that it is an American novel, because we have that different tradition where a lot of our writers haven't been public intellectuals in the same way that a writer would be expected to be in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So a fact like a writer like Pynchon can disappear, that's not unheard of in our culture. But we do have Norman Mailer or someone like that who is a public figure and also a writer.
Right.
And I would say that Norman Mailer would be sort of the exact polar opposite of Richard Brautigan. Brautigan is just not a public intellectual. He is exploring these artistic truths for their own selves and not for some sort of broader social acclaim. Nothing against Norman Mailer.
Yeah. I just crack up at some of the things that go on in this book, as when he goes and he's got to con the landlady, and so he tells her, "My uncle discovered oil in Rhode Island," I yelled across at her. "I own half of it. I'm rich. 20,000 cash for this pile of shit you call an apartment building. 25,000, I yelled. "I want to marry you and raise a whole family of little apartment buildings. I want our wedding certificate printed on a no vacancy sign." It worked. She believed me.
Yep.
And the whole... Yeah. I don't know. I was just asking when I was thinking about this book. So Brautigan's whole approach to his whole writing career, really, is it a combination of super confident? I mean, most people would not dare to try this, even if they sort of had that ability?
Uh-huh.
Or does he just not care?
I thought of the I don't care, and that's kind of where a lot of my ideas came from, but I like the super confident in a way too. I mean, he's going to dream of Babylon. The rest of y'all be damned.
Yeah, and he's not going to have any bullets for his gun, which is the most ridiculous start to a detective novel ever. On purpose.
On purpose, yeah. I mean, that may explain, at least that feeling that he is somehow a singular prose stylist, because I just have trouble putting him side by side with somebody else, and maybe I'm just missed someone who.
I haven't thought of anyone quite this far out, just in terms of approach. He makes Pynchon look pretty. I mean, put Pynchon alongside Dreaming of Babylon, and Pynchon looks fairly conventional.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, and I think that comes from this sort of weird idea of what is a serious endeavor, and I think that Brautigan undercuts that. I mean, his whimsy is very serious, and it's
there's whimsy, but there's also this embrace of absurdism, which I struggle with absurdism, not because I dislike it, but I sometimes fail to connect it to the thing that people say it's commenting on or reflecting on. I suppose that's a fault in my intellectual capacity that I love absurdism. I love, taking something like what Brautigan does here and I'm trying to remember what of his other books. It might have been Confederate General from Big Sur was the one that I read in graduate school, but I can't remember. But I love it. I would love to do things like that, but I can't. And I sometimes wonder if I'm laughing because I get the comedy, or just because there's this weird pattern to the language when the absurdism rolls out its joke.
Well, even in Brautigan, the absurdism has to sort of hang together and work.
Right.
Someone else could try this and it would go off the rails. Now you'd think, this is off the rails at the start, yet it's somehow the train keeps rolling down the track. As we mentioned earlier, you can't quit reading it.
Right. Yeah, mine would descend into, if I tried something like that, it would descend into just slapstick.
Right.
And I don't think anybody can try this. That's kind of what we're saying. Is he seems to be able to pull off things that other people can't pull off.
Right. I agree totally. I've never seen anything quite like this. And the Hawkline Monster was like that too, for me. It's a little masterpiece.
The Abortion was the one that I read that was the same way. I've never forgot it. I read it a long time ago, and I remember thinking at the time, this is just not something, I've never read something like this before.
Get my shit together and read Trout Fishing,
Yeah, I think that's a kind of interesting situation. I probably wonder why I haven't read more of him.
Yeah. It's not like I haven't been encouraged to, I just
when I was thinking about C Card too, I couldn't help but go back to your essay on the dude. And where does the dude
Big Lebowski?
Yeah, and the Big Lebowski, and you could put the dude with Doc Sportello.
You very much could, yeah.
And C Card. C Card doesn't care about being honorable though. He needs money.
That's true. That's true.
But the dude has his own thing. But he's kind of like Doc in a way.
Yeah.
And you made him in your essay on the tarot, if I may. He's the fool, correct?
Yeah.
And so is Doc Sportello the fool?
Oh, wow.
Just symbolically? Or is he kind of somebody else?
Remember, I made Inherent Vice the son.
Oh, right.
But that's the whole package, not just Doc. He doesn't seem to be as much of a zero Trump as
Talking
as
about Doc
Lebowski.
or
Yes, Doc.
Doc.
He doesn't seem to be as much. There's a little more level of sophistication there. Maybe he's one of the cards that's a little. Maybe he's a
somewhere
magician.
else on the symbolic trajectory.
Yeah, because to me the Fool is a foundational card in a way that you sort of, and that's the thing that appeals to me about Lebowski, the dude, is that he's, he sort of undergoes this transformation in the course of the film where he starts to realize that he's sort of unencumbered and free to. And Doc knows that.
Doc's there at the start. He's already there. Doc's almost the world in a way.
Ooh, yeah. He's
He's like at the end of the cycle, which turns around and never ends. I mean, the cycle just starts over.
Which fits with Pynchon's whole thing about decay, and of course, I guess it doesn't because entropy keeps going on. But I'm going to say that anything good that comes up in the culture ultimately cycles down and decays. But then there are other good things that come up again that replace it. But then they're doomed to decay as well. But I would just put C card or Dreaming of Babylon in the tarot. That would be. Now you scared me. I don't even know where to. What do you think?
Where does C card go?
C card
Is there a wild card in the tarot? Is there a joker in the tarot? Is there a trickster figure in the tarot?
Well, I don't know where to put C card. I'd have to think about it.
He's his own card. It's just a C card.
Yeah,
I hadn't stopped to think about just what a scoundrel he is. I mean, he's a really self-centered, sexist pig, and
Peg Leg's right there with him.
Yeah,
the mortician.
Yeah,
they're in cahoots.
Yeah, and Rink really is held up as having a moral code. It's sort of
until the end, right?
Yeah, true. But he gets compromised because of he doesn't really have a choice, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, C card is a real contemptible character. I don't really know about that much.
Do you think
you
Rink
laugh
got
at
to
it?
the bottom of where that woman put all that beer?
He's so broke, though.
Cut the guy some
He's
slack.
desperate,
and he has to dream of Babylon. Give him a break.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of forgive Card the moral lapses because he doesn't have any money, and there's all the foods in the refrigerator is rotten. He can't remember to put all of his clothes on.
Right? Is it Rink who points out, dude, you've only got one sock on?
All of his contemptible qualities are, again, they come out of our culture. They come out of the sort of drive-in movie sexism of how he thinks about any woman he meets. I mean, that's sort of in those movies too. I mean, he's sort of a product of someone who sat at the movie theater and watched too many of those Flash Gordon serials.
Yeah.
Which I think is kind of hard for us because I think that's probably going beyond our experience. But that the film had become powerful in the culture by this point,
right?
By the 40s, anyway. And so sitting through these serials was probably,
yeah.
I mean, as standard as kids now know in Harry Potter, they probably would have all.
Well, I find it
watched these.
interesting. I mean, we don't. He gets beamed by the baseball, starts dreaming of Babylon because of that. Ends up in the Spanish Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shoots himself in the ass when he sits on his own pistol.
Could happen. Could happen. Come on.
And so
when I first heard that he got shot in the ass, I thought it was because he was running from gunfire.
Right.
That's why it was not. But as he points out, there's just no way to have that be a good thing.
Right.
When you're telling your war story. It's even worse. But go ahead.
But so it's I forget where I was going with that. I kind of got derailed.
Sorry about
when
that.
you say shot in the ass, it does kind of derail your thought. You were saying that you were going through his chronology. He got hit with the baseball. He wound up fighting in the Spanish Civil War, and now we're back at just after Pearl Harbor.
His decay is really, really long, but we don't, kind of, we don't get a sense of what precipitated the last, at least I don't, what precipitated the last dive into this situation that he's in. I mean, you get a good flow, you get a good chronology, but he had his, despite getting beamed and starting to dream of Babylon, he's had his shit together enough to, get to Spain, to survive a war.
I think it goes back to that idea that he's not following the standard Protestant work ethic trajectory. That's what Rink represents, right?
Right.
Get yourself to work and get to it. And the dreaming,
get a real job card.
That too. I mean, again, the choice of a PI, even for the time period, is ridiculous. His mother thinks it's ridiculous, and you probably would. Right. But I think that the beating with the baseball and the dreaming of Babylon is just a symbol, just a way to frame it. I think the guy just is a dreamy kind of guy, maybe Brautigan-like, who is not focused enough to get his ass to his job at McDonald's and get promoted and pull himself up by his bootstraps.
Right. And does really that question that question I had really make any sense within the context of this type of story and the way it's constructed? With that kind of absurdism, does it matter that there are logical or narrative gaps? I mean, he does do a good job of tying clues together when things pop up and he sees things and he does tie them together. That follows with the crime and the detective thing. He sees the goons coming out of the morgue before he walks in and realizes something's up, and he pieces it together before we see the goons.
Not as much as he should.
Not as much as he should, but enough that he's not really surprised by their return. He's not surprised by. He's not. But when he ties together that this woman has hired multiple people to get this corpse, he wonders why, but he's not surprised by it. It's like,
Right. Well, I think Brautigan's counting on us all to just be cracking up when she tells him what she wants him to do, and he says, okay. I mean, anyone else would say, no, I know I'm broke and I can't even wash my own clothes, and I have to con the landlady to get a sandwich or a stale donut.
Stale donut, yeah.
But even then, for you, I'm not going to try to steal a body out of the morgue. Forget it.
I think you might lose your license for something like that.
Does he even have a license?
California is actually really difficult in terms of its detective licensing, so I never thought to bring that up.
But would it have been difficult in 1942?
No. Back to Doc talks about being an apprentice, and that's actually very true. You have to apprentice first, unless I've got this wrong and it's changed, but you have to apprentice first in California. It's pretty hard to get your license there, and so Pynchon was pretty straight with that. Brautigan, probably not so much. Does he even mention his license?
No.
I don't know. You may not have needed a license to call yourself a PI in 1942.
This thing.
Yeah.
As you were talking earlier, and I got to thinking about, as you were talking, Jason, I started to think about the whole dreaming of Babylon thing and when it occurs in this narrative. And it does sort of, maybe you've already said this, Paul, in a different way, but Brautigan does seem to be commenting on just the trend in human behavior that, I mean, right at the moments when C-Card, he can almost get to the point where he can relax a little bit. Boy, he's going to start dreaming of Babylon then. He can't dream of Babylon right now because he doesn't have his bullets yet. He can't dream of Babylon right now because of this or that. But boy, when he finally gets his bullets, then by God, it's okay. I can dream of Babylon for a little while. Right. But I mean, there's some tradition for this in world literature, because Odysseus, as you recall, right about the time when they're about to come ashore, is it in the first or second year? And he almost makes it all the way home, and he decides to take a nap. Remember? He's got it made. It looks like they're in.
Kind of blows it.
Yeah.
And that's when his guys start to get curious what's in the bag of wind or whatever. It's been a while since I read it. I don't remember if they open the bag of wind because they're curious or if they think there's money in there or what.
Sounds right.
But they open the bag of wind and he's blown off course again. Just this whole thing of the humans and the condition of wanting to relax at the wrong time and wanting things to be easier than they are. I don't know quite
you got
where
too
I'm
much
going
time
with
on your hand. The first thing you're going to do is fuck it up.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, dreaming of Babylon. It's what we do. You've pretty much said this already, but yeah, I was just coming at it from a different angle, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty complex. I mean, just the notion of what the human mind has the power to do in a daydream is pretty awesome. And I mean, the fact that his daydreams are perhaps a little more ridiculous than most people's.
Well, he's got a specific girlfriend.
Well, yeah,
they're a little more specific, maybe.
Yeah, they are. They're pretty wild. But then again, we haven't been sitting in the movie theater and watching the Flash Gordon serial every week. And
in 1942, this is pre-television, pre-everything. I mean, you don't have anything else to do but sit around and daydream if you're broke as hell and have to put in lower wattage light bulbs so you can't see the filth you live in. I mean, what else are you going to do but sit in that filth and project yourself into something else?
And the mind has an amazing capacity to. I mean, nothing that he does, as much as it's kind of ridiculous, it's not unimaginable. I mean, it's not beyond the pale of human mentality to do that.
Right.
I think that even if your daydreams don't have a specific girlfriend named or a specific place, you are probably capable of some pretty elaborate daydreams. And that's a pretty amazing faculty.
So do you think you've ever met anybody like this guy in real life? Just a total incompetent waste? but somehow still charming?
Well,
I don't...
I hope not.
No, I haven't. Yeah, but...
People don't tell you their daydreams, though.
That's true. When I was a kid, I had some pretty elaborate daydreams. Every one of my stuffed animals sort of had a place on the baseball team. They weren't about Babylon, but
I started spinning. I spun a lot of daydreams as a kid too.
Yeah,
I went to Catholic school, and so we went to mass to start the day. And I eventually, as I went through grade school, got into this pattern of you'd go into mass, sit down, and 45 minutes later, mass is ending, and I missed the whole thing.
Right. So what were your daydreams during mass?
I don't remember.
Hopefully they weren't blasphemous.
Really? No.
Hopefully.
It's too long ago. I don't remember what I was doing, but the problem that I found, and the nuns had to call mom a couple times, was that the daydreams kind of leaked over into classroom time then too.
Right.
So they had to wake me up a little bit. Time to study, buddy.
Yeah.
I don't think that anything that C-Card does is beyond normal human experience. It's just made absurd.
Right.
I think everybody's daydreamed. If people haven't, then I feel kind of sorry for them in a way.
I did walk into kindergarten and convince the whole class I was getting a pet tiger and that my mother was pregnant again. Right.
You should have helped your mom with the rent.
I don't know,
the landlady.
My mother has stories about, coming to pick me up from kindergarten and the teacher pulling her aside and going, Jason says he's getting a pet tiger. And I had to, okay, I'll deal with it. And then she comes to pick me up another day and she walks up to my mom and goes, congratulations. He's like, for what? Teacher goes, well, Jason says you're pregnant again. He's going to have a little brother. It's like my mom said, no, I got my tubes tied after the last one. And, and of course my daydreams, my mom was a preacher's kid. So we were, it was pretty much family habit to go to church on Sundays. And I was bored to death there. And of course this was, the late 70s, early 80s. And my daydream in church was always, inspired by Red Dawn.
You were worried about commies?
Oh, I imagined, all sorts of, commies and whatever would be parachuting outside and running through the church, and how I would get out of the church and survive and go off into the mountains with my school friends and Wolverines. And, except,
you can easily get to a theory anyway, at the very least, that daydream life was different when we were kids than it is now. When I was a kid in the 70s, I'm just a little older than you are. Very few college football games or baseball games were on TV back then. And you had, I remember going to my grandpa's house in Fredonia. He had an old black and white TV. You had to go over, and you hoped when you got there that reception was going to be good on Saturday so you could watch the game. But you might have to go over and whack the TV. So you listened to games on the radio back then a lot more. Maybe people still do it. I haven't done it for some time because it's usually on TV. But there was a very imagined world with listening to it on the radio.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, there's also plenty of evidence out there, I think, that culture tries to restrict that little kids have an amazing creative power, and one of the big things at school is to cut that back and say, stay focused. You don't want to end up like C cards. You want to be like Rink. And I think this novel just sort of falls right in that whole divide where half you have responsibility to people around you in a culture to remain in this world, right? But you also should have the liberty as an individual to go to Babylon if you so choose.
if this were set in the modern era, then instead of dreaming of Babylon, he'd be fucking with his iPhone.
Right, he'd be on Facebook in a fight with somebody on Facebook. Or
I hope kids still have plenty of daydreaming space. I don't think the technology, hopefully.
Fighting on Facebook would be the name of this book.
It's different escapism.
Probably. I'm just holding out some hope that there'll always be a little C card in people too. I just think that there is something redeeming in the end about his dreams, as ridiculous as they are.
And his willingness to commit crimes to achieve them.
Well, situational ethics, man. If a rich lady who drank a lot of beer wanted me to go steal a corpse from the morgue, I'd probably give it a shot.
What are we to think about her? I was wondering about that. The fact that she's the real peg leg in this damn thing. She drinks as much beer as she wants, and it never goes. I was almost warming up to the idea that she doesn't exist either.
She's.
What do you mean either?
I think she exists because Rink walks off with her, but I think I think she does represent an illusion of a feminine illusion to C-Card. She is a woman who likes a man's drink. Beer is a man's drink, and isn't affected by it. Doesn't get drunk. Doesn't have to pee. But she's.
Right, and she takes Rink on,
and then she's also duplicitous, and she's
femme fatale.
Secretive, and
we're going back to our noir.
Yeah,
she retains her grace under pressure, even when handcuffed.
The thing is, though, the thing about the beer and not peeing may just be Brautigan's stroke of genius, because it seems like everything else is kind of a recognizable icon of the mystery novel. I mean, the tough Irish cop. I don't know if he's Irish, but just the tough cop who's got this code, and then the sort of creepy morgue attendant. Sorry to all morgue attendants out there. I don't mean to imply anything, but there's that sort of a stereotype in literature too.
Right.
So so the socialite, the rich socialite, we're still there. She drinks beer and doesn't go to the bathroom. Then we're like, where does that come from? Is there some sort of inside joke that
there's also
we just missed?
There's also some 70s humor in here that. Well, I mean, just some of the things that C-Card says that you probably wouldn't now, even in a novel like this. Maybe you would. I'm not going to be able to think of a specific example.
You're talking about the sexism? Because he kind of dances around the racism angle.
And what he says about the landlady. And
Yeah. It's pretty horrible stuff.
It is.
Yeah, he's a pretty horrible guy. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, it's all focused through C. Card's point of view.
Yeah, he's going to end up
It probably could happen today.
owing Pegleg a lot of money after wrecking his car.
Yeah. He ends up giving the $500 to the black guys. I'm trying to remember at the end. Does he walk away with any cash?
I don't remember.
I think he ends up giving the $500 to the Smiley's gang. Comes up at the end, and he has to fork over the cash, doesn't he? I don't know.
I was off on a trip thinking about how many times the word Babylon is in this novel.
Were you dreaming of Babylon? Yeah.
I was just thinking about the word Babylon in the novel. I mean, it's just it's all over the place.
I'd never heard of this novel when you brought it up, and you said the title "Dreaming of Babylon." I never envisioned that it was going to be about dreaming of Babylon, and the narrator was going to say repeatedly, "Whoops, almost dreamed of Babylon again."
Right.
It's so ridiculous. I just can't even.
Well, and Nebuchadnezzar,
He's got to show up.
being a character in this thing.
The Hanging Gardens, the gate, the Ishtar Gate, maybe even is mentioned specifically.
Brautigan could have picked Nabopolassar or Nebuchadnezzar, and he went with Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know. I think
There's not much else, I guess, is my point as far as Babylonian culture and that's because C. Card doesn't know.
Right.
Probably he knows. He's heard.
I think that's why
He's heard of the Hanging Gardens, and
that's why we end up with sort of a 1942 version of Babylon.
yeah. I think it's fair. I think C. Card just needed to make it a novel or write a script for a movie, and he'd have been fine.
Kind of like the character from Williford's book. Just
Yeah. The two of those guys would get along really well together, wouldn't they? Different time periods, but
I hadn't even thrown Hudson into this whole quagmire.
Hudson
yet.
should have just met C. Card. The two of them should have worked together on a script.
Where does the C card fit with Hudson? Yeah.
because they both have that. I mean,
Have insight, but somehow are contemptible characters.
I don't think Williford's book was, had the same kind of absurdist intent, but the character, the narrator in that one, as far as the crime and the thing like this is C. Card and Hudson are.
But there's some ridiculousness too. The Santa suits,
right? The Santa suits, and
dancing with his mother, and let's not forget, C. Card's always talking about his
mother.
Yeah, and it ends with the mother being the
there's a different tone to the narrator's kind of mental psychosis and self-obsession between that book and this one, but they're still kind of similar. Yeah. They're both obsessed with money, with their relationship to other people, with getting to this thing, and Hudson wants to make a movie, and C. Card wants to dream of Babylon and have an office with a hot secretary who blows him.
Right.
And they're both completely incapable of actually doing what needs to be done ultimately to, Hudson won't compromise, and this guy won't stop with the masturbating, basically. The mental masturbating, which is what Dreaming of Babylon is. It's
Right.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. That was a pleasant distraction after, feeling like I had smoked pot through Pynchon.
feeling like
it, yeah. Maybe I should have smoked pot when I was reading
didn't?
Pynchon. No.
Oh, well, no wonder. How known is... Because I think that this should come up in more... Dreaming of Babylon should come up in more discussions about the detective genre.
The only reason I know about it is a longtime customer was a big Brautigan guy, and I remember grabbing this on an OP search for him. And he came back in and told me how great it was. And so then, I had to go get one and read it.
Who was it?
Who was what?
The customer.
Oh, we shouldn't. I probably shouldn't. Yeah. But, yeah.
We'll do that in special session. Save that for...
So that's how I got wind.
We need the script. Someone needs to turn this into a film.
What a funny...
Paul Thomas Anderson might be able to do that.
Would you have to have some kind of a voiceover for it? I don't know.
Yeah, you would think.
That would be tough. Voiceovers can be a a challenge. They can really fuck something up.
Do you know what happened in the Inherent Vice movie? Have you seen that?
No.
There's a see it, and there's a really interesting use of voiceover in that film that goes directly to what you're saying that will surprise you. You'll be surprised who's speaking and which lines are being spoken.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can do it. It's just
It works in Goodfellas
yeah.
pretty well. But, yeah.
Well, there's enough of him talking and dialogue that you could write it into the script and have a reason for him to explain his...
I almost think you want
No.
C. Card to actually talk directly to the audience at certain points, because it's so crazy. When he's dreaming of Nana Dorad or whatever,
Right.
he kind of steps out of it and says, "But I had the dream of Nana Dorad."
Yeah, I think it would work. Someone needs to buy the rights. Get the Brautigan estate on the line.
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams, that'd be his next project.
You know?
Can we just do an anti-J.J. Abrams podcast where we...
Do you have a problem with Mr. Abrams?
No, I'm just kidding. I don't even know who that is.
Any last
This
words?
is like the only one we've really kind of wandered off to the point where we're kind of random at this point.
So we're doing Lawrence Osborne on
Yep.
the last one.
Returning to
Only to
Marlowe.
Sleep.
Only to Sleep.
And of course we'll do that one, and then we'll do our summation roundup of everything. And
Oh, right, in the next episode.
right, the last one. Yep.
Yeah, very good. Talk about the books that we like the best and so forth.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we've covered a wide enough swath. I'm sure there's some little subgenre out there that's really cool that we missed, but hitting something like this, to me, like I said, this is so great for you to bring this in here, because I think that is just an interesting twist on the whole notion of detective fiction that
So yeah, we'll
should be included.
We'll have Osborne's little coda taking us back to the beginning, and then like I said, we'll go over a summary of everything, and also kind of maybe cover some of the stuff we missed, some of the stuff we left out, and kind of point to other things, particularly if we want to discover more, or if you think I should discover more, since this was kind of to point me around the genre a little bit more, or our listeners, whoever they may be. So
Both of them.
Right. Any last words?
Now we can dream of Babylon.
All right.
It is, yes.
Thanks, guys. The Outrider podcast is hosted by me, Jason Quinmalott, and produced by Heather Ann Eden. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and go there to please rate us and give us a review, or you can get the show straight from our host, podbean.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.